الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Hello everybody, good evening. My story begins the first time I ever saw my father cry. I was 16 years old, and at this point I had only ever really known my dad for this mountainous strength. And honestly, I never even considered the possibility that my father could cry. That day he picked me up from the train station, and as soon as I got into his car, I could feel this heaviness in it. And so I asked him, "What's wrong, Baba?" He told me that my grandfather was getting sicker. He was edging at the end of his life. And when he said this, his voice cracked, and almost like the rock to kickstart a landslide, my dad began to cry. And in my life, I had never seen him this way. And so I did something that I hadn't done since I was a 3-year-old crossing the street. I reached over and I grabbed his hand. And to my surprise, he squeezed my hand back. My dad's side of the family is from Syria. At this point, we have lost 49 members of my family. My grandfather's illness came in 2014, when the war was in its 3rd year. Every single day, the Assad regime was launching airstrikes. It was chemical attacks, Scud missiles, barrel bombs, snipers. There were 100 ways to die. Not to mention, around the city of my family, there was a very intense siege being imposed, which meant no food or medicine was going in and no one was coming out. So my father and all of his siblings outside of Syria had to accept the death of their father from thousands of miles away without being able to do a thing about it. My name is Amal. My name means hope in Arabic. I am a Syrian American Muslim woman, and I am a storytelling activist. I call myself this because, well, stories transform people. They have the power of turning complete strangers into family. Now, in the early days of my work, I was known as a firecracker. My first gig was in front of the White House when I was 17 under the banner of "World Silence is Killing Syria." Ho, ho, ho. Well, I was going to show you a picture of my mouth, very, very large. And I was notorious for it. Now, when the refugee crisis hit its peak in 2015, I was asked by one of my professors to give a presentation. The photo of Aylan Kurdi, the 3-year-old refugee child who washed ashore the beaches of Turkey, was on every single mainstream network. It was iconic. And this little boy got the entire world to pay attention. When my professor asked me to do this presentation, I took it as my duty. And so I gave a whole talk. I did not mention my family's tie to the crisis. I only gave some background, a little history, some photos here and there, and I ended on this note of pretty intense frustration about the world's inaction towards the conflict. Then I got an email from one of the professors who attended my talk. And he told me that I was way too angry. And that if I wanted to get my message across, I needed to relax a little bit. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I took pretty deep offense to this. I thought to myself, how could someone be so insensitive to think that this conflict that had claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands of people, that talking about it was warranted anything but anger? I'd grown up to believe that anger was necessary to get the world leaders to pay attention. It was the only way they seemed to hear us. We needed it when we stood outside of the White House and the United Nations amplifying our voices. We needed it to force the leaders of the world who were turning a blind eye to look. But what about everyone else? What about the people in the classrooms, or the audiences, the people in my Facebook feeds, the ones who weren't necessarily megaphone-toting activists? Well, as much as I hate to admit it, I had to reflect on where this professor was coming from. The anger seemed to have dehumanized the situation for a lot of people. And I mean, this makes sense. There's certain media outlets that will only depict minority groups and people of color in a light of anger, because anger doesn't get sympathy, especially when you have no connection to whatever it is they're outraged about. All you end up seeing is a bunch of strangers in the streets shouting. And that's why the photo of Aylan Kurdi, the refugee child, was so impactful. There wasn't even a note of anger about it. It was full of sorrow and devastation. And that sadness managed to connect everybody's heart. I had a decision to make about what kind of activist I wanted to be. And I decided that it was more important for me to engage as many hearts as I possibly could than to demand that people be as angry as I am. Don't get me wrong, the anger has its place. I do have a big megaphone with charged batteries waiting for me when the time is necessary. But in the meantime, we have to build something a whole lot sturdier, something deeper than anger. I believe that a sad story has the power to link two human hearts together. They can make family out of strangers. This was apparent to me when I would perform all over the United States, and almost every single time, at least one veteran would come up to me and tell me they could relate to my story. Imagine that, a US white war veteran able to relate to a Syrian American Muslim woman. Who would have thought? Sadness, it surpasses language, race, faith, geography. The tears of mother sound like the tears of mother wherever you go. Grief sounds like grief. Homeless looks like homeless. Poverty looks like poverty. Tears are all the same. One day, my big brother Yasser sent me a photo. This is us. Growing up, I was the little duckling that would follow him wherever he went. And the depth of my heart, the expansion of my mind heavily has to do with my big brother. And that's why when he sent me this photo, I could not help but to see myself in it. This is a photo that came out of Syria after a bombing. And the first thing the brother did when he got out of the rubble was hold on to his baby sister. Look at the striking resemblance. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, when one part of the human body hurts, the whole body will feel pain. This pain is where you find solidarity. And trust me, I know it is not easy. Our hearts have difficulty watching someone else experience sorrow. Because for a moment there, you inherit whatever it is they're experiencing. You feel with them. That's why solidarity takes courage. It takes courage to look at that. It takes courage to share in this weight of humanity. There's a whole lot in the world right now that warrants our sadness. There's crises left and right, whether it's poverty or high suicide rates, whether it's depression or divorce, whether it's genocide or famine, a war in Syria or a drought in Somalia. And it's hard to distribute our hearts wherever we are. It's heavy. But anyone who's experienced grief knows that it's a whole lot more manageable when you have the right kind of support and solidarity. Perhaps we can't fix the whole world, but I assure you, every single human has the power to fit the whole world inside of their hearts. And if more people had the world inside their hearts, just imagine all the change that we could make. This is solidarity, bearing each other's heavy burdens, even if it's just for a moment. And solidarity will make it so that you do what you must for one another. Whether it's standing in front of a bulldozer like Rachel Corrie, whether it's saying Sandra Bland's name, whether it's changing your profile picture to something that represents a cause that desperately needs attention, or whether it's just reaching out and holding your dad's hands in a moment of sorrow. Thank you, brave strangers, for listening to me today. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your night.